Hello, welcome everybody to the City of LA Department of Rec and Parks Needs Assessment. We're going to be going through a budget dive today. We are going to allow just a couple minutes for more folks to join us. So if you are just entering the room, give us a couple minutes before we begin the presentation.
Muy buenas tardes y bienvenidos a la evaluación de las necesidades de los parques de la ciudad de Los Ángeles, Parques y Recreaciones. El día de hoy vamos a hablar de presupuestos. Vamos a esperar unos minutitos más para que se conecten otras personas.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. We are just giving it a couple minutes to allow more folks to join. So thanks to all those who just came in. We are just giving it a couple minutes.
Gracias a todos por su participación. Estamos esperando unos minutitos más para asegurarnos que se conecten todos. Unos minutos nada más.
All right. Welcome everybody to the City of LA Department of Rec and Parks Needs Assessment. We're going to be going through budget cost estimates and decision-making deep dive for this particular topical virtual meeting. Before we begin, I'm going to have Jackie, our Spanish interpreter, just make a quick announcement.
Muy buenas tardes y gracias por la participación en la evaluación de las necesidades de los parques de la ciudad de Los Ángeles, Departamento de Parques. El día de hoy habrá interpretación simultánea de inglés a español y español a inglés. Por favor, en la parte inferior derecha de la pantalla, donde ven un globo terráqueo, van a pulsar ese globo terráqueo. Luego escogerán el idioma de preferencia, en este caso español. Gracias.
Great. Thank you, Jackie. So again, you should be here because you're interested in the Department of Park and Rec's Parks Needs Assessment. Again, we're going to be going through a budget deep dive for this. Again, thanks for being here on a Wednesday evening. We very much appreciate you all coming out and joining us today. Just going through a few housekeeping slides. We do have Spanish interpretation available. If you click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen, you can pick the language you would like to listen to. We have Spanish interpretation for today's meeting. There's also closed captioning. If you click the show captions at the bottom of the screen also, you are able to see the closed captions that way. So we're going to go through a presentation today, and then if you do have any questions or comments, click on the Zoom Q&A function, and you can write a question in there, or if you just have a comment, you can write a comment directly in there as well. We'll try to answer as many of those questions at the very end of the presentation as best as we can, focusing on questions that are of broadest interest. If you do have any difficulties with the Zoom Q&A function, you can call or text 213-290-0277. So if you're joining by phone and don't have access to the Zoom Q&A function, you can text that number. Again, it's 213-290-0277. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Henson, who's a landscape architect and lead for this project.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us in this deep dive session. We're really excited about the opportunity to talk in more detail about budgets and some of the decision-making framework pieces of the Parks Needs Assessment. I do want to take a moment and say, if you would like to watch an overview, like if this is not the deep dive that you were seeking, but you were seeking more of an overview, we'll show you in a minute where you can access that information as well. The Parks Needs Assessment is an initiative by the City of Los Angeles. The Department of Recreation and Parks is leading it this year. This was directive of council and the Rec and Parks Board, and really excited to be doing this. The last time the city did a Parks Needs Assessment was 2009, so definitely in need of that update. We have the project schedule we've been moving through. We are in the third of 4 phases. The draft Parks Needs Assessment was completed and posted last week. And we're doing this series of sessions to help people that want to understand more about it, understand more. And like Isaiah said, my name is Jessica Henson. I'm a landscape architect and planner at Olin here in Los Angeles. And I'm going to be joined by 2 of my colleagues tonight who are going to help really explain some of the deep budget aspects and some of the deep decision-making framework items of the P&A. I'll introduce those 2 folks. Connie Chung, who's leading the economic analysis, and Max Dixon, who is leading a lot of the decision-making framework, of course, in partnership with leaders at Rec and Parks a little later tonight in the presentation. I'll show just a few intro slides here just to help everyone get oriented, but then we're going to dive pretty deep pretty quickly. Your voice matters. The engagement is foundational to the effort of the Parks Needs Assessment, and the over 70 or 80 different events have been held this year, along with analog, digital, social media, videos, to help people weigh in on what they think is important for the future of our parks. And the draft Parks Needs Assessment, like I mentioned, is now available. It's available through October 15th. You can comment on the plan on the website. There are lots of different ways to interact with it. You can interact with all of the content directly on the website in a clickable interface. You can do that in more than 10 languages. There also is alt text for those that might be visually impaired. You can download a PDF if you want to just explore the document on your own terms or print it out. Or you can even comment on the PDF inside the interface of the web. You can also check it out on your mobile device. One of the fun things to do if you really want to look for a specific park is to find your park on you can do this on the website or on a mobile device. But if you go to the website, which is needs.parks.lacity.gov, you can navigate from the home banner to the Find a Park function and actually start to zoom in on any park in the system to understand more about it. So if you want to do that, definitely check it out. We're going to be putting links in the chat throughout the evening that will help you find some of this information online. I also just wanted to mention tonight's the project deep dive into budget, costing, decision making. If you're looking for a more general update on the project, we did one last night, and you can actually go watch that recording. So don't worry, we wouldn't be offended if you wanted to hang up and just watch that. We hope you'll stay. But if you were looking for something high level and you wanted to hear a little bit about each section of the P&A, definitely encourage you to check out needs.parks.lacity.gov/downloads. So tonight we'll get a little bit deeper into some of the topics. The City of Los Angeles owns or operates about 500 park sites on 16,000 acres around the city of Los Angeles and almost 100 miles of trails. From our largest parks like Griffith Park in the upper left-hand corner here, to our smallest parks, parks really are a critical part of our everyday lives. We've been using this diagram this year to show all the parks that we have. And what I love about this is it shows that, yes, while we have some large parks, we also have all of these neighborhood and community parks that are so important to all of us. We've been looking at a project financial snapshot, really looking at what some of our issues in the park system are. And like many other major cities since the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, LA has struggled with chronic underfunding of our park maintenance, which has really limited our ability to steward the existing parks that we have and realize the future of the critical public spaces that we have. And this is really what we're going to dive into tonight. Super excited to be joined directly by Connie Chung, who's a planner that's been leading the economic analysis. She's going to start with a sort of deep dive into the budget as it exists today. And then her and I will be going through some of the budget gaps and benchmarking that we know from the system. And again, if you have Q&A during this, if you want to drop it in the Q&A function, we will take a look at those later. I'm going to turn it over to Connie from HRNA. Thanks, Connie.
Thanks, Jessica, and hi, everyone. So we begin with a baseline, meaning we're looking back 25 years in order to provide a framework in which to project forward another 25 years. So a lot of times as we're referring to the data in this section, in this deep dive, we'll talk about the last 25 years. Now, the process of the P&A, you've heard probably in other meetings about a lot of the other work in evaluating data and benchmarking and understanding the funding gaps. We've actually dug a lot in each of those sections into the budget and staffing data. We've benchmarked RAP's budget against peer cities, which we'll talk about shortly. And then we've used that to identify what the funding gaps really are. Now, as we're talking about the baseline of the last 25 years, just zooming out a bit, RAP has actually acquired 117 new parks since 2000, which really has added hundreds of acres to the city park system. And meanwhile, RAP is currently funded through these sources here on the left. The current funding sources are primarily the city's budget and then Prop K. But then in the next few years, as you can see in the column on the right, a few funding sources will go away. Prop K is going to expire next year in 2026. And Play LA at the very bottom of the list, which was a commitment related to supporting youth sports and recreation based on hosting the Olympics in 2028, that will actually expire in 2028 and go away. And as we think about the operating budget, it really is from these three primary sources. First, on the left, the city charter actually mandates that a certain amount of the city's property tax receipts, which get sent to them from the county, a certain percentage of that, 0.0325%, forms the basis of the RAP budget. In addition, RAP is able to earn revenue through things like concessions and leases. If you go to the Greek Theater, for example. And in addition, there are discretionary dollars from the general fund that are allocated each year through the budgeting process. And so what does that look like in total? RAP's budget is around $350 million for both revenue and expenses. As we look at the green revenue bar, you can see the total there and the composition. But as we look at the expenses on the right, which we'll dive into, that's really comprised at the very bottom of $91 million in programming costs. So all the things that we consider to be the events and activities that people do. $131 million in maintenance costs, everything from the land maintenance itself to every building and facility that RAP operates, even some city services, its own refuse collection. $34 million in administration costs, which is everything from technology that RAP uses to log in and sign up for activities, to the general admin and support that really keeps the department running. And then there's $92 million that needs to be reimbursed back to the city's general fund to really pay for pension and benefits as well as utilities. On the revenue side, we've talked about these three sources. So you see the 298 million that's from the city charter property tax revenue allocation. The lighter green bar at the top is 61 million in earned revenue, and then a drop in the bucket of unspecified funds. And we just want to highlight that we're in the middle of a serious sort of budget crisis this year. And in the mayor's proposed budget for fiscal year 2026, the year that we're in now that ends in June of next year, RAP would not receive any additional funding from the general fund. So we actually only receive funds through two of these three buckets, the charter mandated appropriation, as well as any earned revenue. So that would significantly impact the budget. You can see that the budget will increase, but it still will not get those general fund allocations. And let's talk a little bit about the city charter mandated allocation. Right now, I mentioned it's actually 3.25% of every $100, aka 0.0325%, but it's a lot easier to talk about it in terms of dollars and cents. So for every $100 of property value, for every Los Angeles home, 3.25 cents goes towards RAP. And this rate has not changed since 1937. It is 2025, and this rate has not changed. And that's something that we found to be really interesting and potentially an opportunity. And while the operating budget has increased since 2009, most of that increase, which you can see the different colored bars, you see that the yellow bar is what we talk about as the general fund reimbursement, which again pays for staff benefits and utilities. And meanwhile, the city's operating budget as a whole has grown 68%. That's the second purple line here, while RAP's operating budget has only increased 35% in that very same time. So it's increased more slowly. Hi. It's increased more slowly than the overall city budget.
What are you talking about?
The Great Recession resulted in major staffing cuts, and you can see that here in the red line. When 30 to 40% of positions were eliminated and simply not restored. And RAP still hasn't recovered from those cuts since then. You can see that because of the increases in staffing costs have risen alongside the cost of living, the total operating budget nonetheless increased while the staffing numbers went down. So today there are about 1,500 staff full-time compared to the 2008 high of 1,961. And if you delve into the composition here of RAP's personnel, as full-time staff have decreased by necessity, RAP has had to increasingly rely on part-time staff to stretch its capacity to meet needs. And you see that increase in the white bars since around 2011. In comparison to the 1,500 full-time staff, you have almost 4,000 of part-time staff. So, and when we looked across peer systems, we looked at San Francisco, San Diego, in California, as well as Chicago, New York, Dallas, and Washington. We wanted to compare levels of investment as a point of comparison. So you can see that in Los Angeles, the amount of operations and maintenance investment per capita, that's the purple bar, is lower than most of its peers other than in New York. And I will put an asterisk on that comment. In New York City, what may not be accounted for here is a significant amount of conservancies and friends groups that actually both help reduce operating costs for the park system, the public parks, as well as spend their own dollars towards those operations and maintenance needs. And then the red bar, the capital investment in Los Angeles, is much smaller on a per capita basis than in any of the other peer cities.
Thanks, Connie. That's a great point and a really good transition to capital improvement projects over the last 25 years. So in addition to the economic analysis, we wanted to look at investments around the city and in different areas of the communities and what parks have received funding. So we've done an analysis looking at how much about $1.2 billion in capital improvement projects over the last 25 years have been completed. You can see that about 42% of that came from Prop K. That was, as Connie mentioned, a measure that that was passed in 1996. It had a 30-year time period. 18% or $217 million from Quimby dollars. Those are fees that are paid by developers when they're building large housing projects or other, usually more than 50 units. 19% are non-grant projects, generally like other sort of funding, and then 21% from grants. Looking at the Prop K, there still are some projects being finished out there between how many have been completed and how many are allocated for active or future, to get a sense of that. We wanted to understand the scale of some of those different projects that have been completed. So we sorted everything into different buckets, projects less than $100,000, projects between $100,000 and $1 million, projects between $1 million and $10 million, and projects greater than $10 million. And these are just some examples on the screen, but by and large, what we've found is a lot of small projects, projects under $1 million have been completed. Very few projects in the more than $10 million bucket over the last 25 years. What that means is we have less RAP staff trying to do more little projects. They still take a lot of time to manage small projects. And so we're seeing, as we have a staffing crunch, there's also a capacity issue in completing these projects. That also tracks with what we've heard from communities this year. Some communities have said dollars have been allocated and our project just isn't moving as quickly as we'd like. Breaking that down around the city, we've looked at how each individual park has been funded or not funded for capital improvements in the past 25 years. This map on the left is a abstract map of the city of LA. If you get a sense, that's the overall shape. And then each square represents a park, one of our approximately 500 parks in the system. They are sort of geographically located, but we've made all of them a square so that you can see by percent here. Over the past 25 years, 70% of parks have received some sort of capital funding. This is really important as we've looked at prioritization because we're looking at past investment to understand what parks really haven't been invested in that need them, and what areas of the city maybe have had more or less. Looking over the last 25 years, the South LA and the Valley have had the most, Central and East the next, and then the West has had the least. We also looked at that capital funding per acre. And so some areas have a lot more acreage, for example. And so it's one thing to say, you know, X number of parks in the Valley had funding or Y funding, but what's the value of that? And here you can see over the last 25 years, really parks in the South had the most investment per acre, followed by the Central and East, followed by the West, and then the Valley in terms of that. So while the Valley had the most overall investment by park, it had the least per acre. And we've really been looking ahead, and I'll pass it back to Connie here to be thinking about how some of these funding elements will really play into this, because there's going to be significant challenges as Prop K expires, and as Connie mentioned, Play LA will expire in 2028. And we're, you know, projecting a budget deficit this year, reduced assessments, which is going to reduce how much money RAP gets through the mandated assessment revenue. So we're tracking all of those things, but one of the most important aspects of the P&A is to really look beyond 1 year timeframes to the need over 5, 10, 15, 20-year periods, so that we sort of get out of an annual cycle of need that we don't know how we're meeting needs, you know, year to year. So this next section is on cost and funding. And as Connie mentioned, we've been doing parts 1, 2, and 3 here with evaluating the budget and identifying gaps, looking at benchmarks. And then the next step was really to use cost estimates to size capital. So while Connie's team has been doing a lot of economic analysis, our team at Olin has been looking at the park conditions around the entire city. So number 4 here is really based on the actual assessment of each individual park's facilities. So looking at the almost 40 different types of amenities and parks all around the city, all 500 parks, we are looking at deferred maintenance, how many things just haven't been handled that need to. We're looking at the costs of operating the existing parks we already have, and we're looking at new things that people have requested. I think it's really important to mention that one of the big things we've heard this year from a lot of communities is, can we just please take better care of the things that we already have, rather than adding new things to the system before we take care of the things that we already have. And so instead of, like, some studies, I think often look at the idea of new capital projects, but not the idea of operating costs. You see here, we're looking at both. In this, we've looked at all of the facilities, as I said, whether they're in need of a minor refresh, a major refresh, or a new build. This is based directly on the actual observation of a facility. So if a pool at a specific site is in a bad condition, it may be in need of better maintenance. If it's a specific tennis court that needs resurfacing in poor condition, does it need a new rebuild, or can it be refinished how it is? So from that, we've done that for park facilities, architectural elements, infrastructure elements, such as like electrical service and water service, as well as the potential for new park facilities, identifying communities that need new parks, or places where we need to consider acquiring land for parks or using public lands for parks. In parallel to this, and I'll turn it over to Connie to talk about staffing. So, you know, we have the things we need to do with deferred maintenance or building, as well as the things that we need to do for capital. Connie, could you speak to this slide, and then I'll pick it back up on the next one? Or
Sure.
maybe two, yeah.
Yeah, so we looked at what would be needed to sort of level up on the personnel and staffing side. And because partly, you know, we heard a lot about the impact that staffing shortages had from community engagement on people's experiences in the park system. And in order to project out 25 years, we looked at 3 different methods, and those are described here. Increasing the capacity and service by 1.5 times. We looked at returning to the known peak from 2008. And finally, we actually looked at how we could increase staffing levels to align with peer systems. And then we also increased expenses by a commensurate amount that to the last 10 years of RAP's budget.
So when we bring all this together, between the needs assessment for deferred maintenance, capital improvements, as well as the operating needs and staffing, this is what that looks like. We have a couple of different numbers here. There's a one-time capital need of $15 billion. This is in 2025 dollars, but one time meaning 15 billion over 25 years. If we were to do everything that has been requested, I'll break that down a little bit more on the next slide. And for annual operating needs, a need of about 525 to 625 million. As Connie mentioned earlier, the current budget is around $350 million. So this represents roughly a $175–200 million need in addition to the existing budget to meet the gap that has been identified this year by residents and others who have provided feedback. So let's dive a little bit into that $15 billion number. This includes a couple of things. One is deferred maintenance. So every year that goes by that we don't handle things in our park system, we defer issues to the future. So if a building was in bad condition in 2018 and it hasn't been addressed, it's probably in worse condition today. And at some point, those issues of deferred maintenance become very problematic because things become too dilapidated to rescue, if you will. The other 12 billion or so in this number is what we call the level of service goals. This is new facilities, new acres, new amenities to meet all the things that we've heard from Angelenos this year, as well as to meet all of the acreage needs and that we have in the city. Recognizing that not all of the things will happen. This is why prioritizing things and the prioritization effort of the Parks Needs Assessment is so important. On the operating side, like I mentioned, this is about a $500 to $600 million need. And this would break down in terms of around $320 million for staffing, around $70 million for expenses, and then up to $220 million for the general fund reimbursements. As Connie mentioned earlier, that general fund reimbursement, which started in 2008, that is money that Rec and Parks pays for pensions, benefits, and utilities. Currently, that number is around $92 million. Over the next 25 years, we expect that number will continue to rise. Those elements are not becoming less expensive. So whether it comes from a reimbursement from the RAP budget or if it comes from the general fund, that money will come from somewhere in this system. All in all, we have some opportunities here to really consider how some of these costs break down. There is already money in the system. All of this does not have to be new money. We have existing budgets, we have existing Quimby funds. So it's not saying we have to find $15 billion in the next 25 years with no money already. So really we're trying to think, what are some of our priorities in this? We looked at breaking this down different ways in the Parks Needs Assessment. So for example, if we wanted to focus on the 36 new per square mile sites, that's approximately a $1.3 billion effort if we're using the land acquisition costs. Or we said, what if in the top 15 priority sites, we wanted to accomplish some small project? For about 25 million, there's something to be done at the top 15 projects if we look at that on a per acre cost size. So I just want to be a little bit encouraging here that there are dollars that are already moving through this system, and we just need to know how to steward those well. Some things that have been brought up this year, particularly on the staffing side, as we look at where people really want to see expansions in the staff. We've heard a lot about maintenance for native habitat management and ecologists. We've heard a lot about accessibility and specialists around this. We've heard a lot about enforcement and the need for our rangers to have more staff to be able to keep people safe in our parks and also just make sure that illegal activities aren't happening. And then potential need for something that we're calling park ambassadors, people that can really help understand wayfinding or help give information, but really be that friendly face there. Can help with critical social services too for people that might need to be connected to other city or county services. So these sort of things are things that we've heard people say, this is how I'd like to see additional operating dollars at RAP utilized. And then Connie's been working on additional new strategies that we could think about or leveraging better some of these strategies.
That's right. Those are big numbers. And so we had to look at how we could actually meet those needs. And the one thing I really want everyone to take away from today's presentation is that we need every strategy in this toolkit. And it can't be solved by any one of these boxes, and RAP can't do it on its own. So on the left here in the purple, we have strategies that RAP can really lead and start tackling now. You know, obviously these are going to be things that won't happen overnight, but RAP can decide to do them. For example, increasing the earned revenue generation through, you know, parking rates, concessions and leases, as well as the sponsorship, you know, for example, with season-long programming. It can also begin to leverage state and federal funding sources. Measure A, Parks Measure A, as well as Measure W, the Safe Clean Water Act, which is regional, as well as California Prop O and Prop 4. Those are things that if you had a devoted sort of grant writer, RAP could really pursue those, identify opportunities and pursue them proactively and seek strategies out that really help funding new parks and park investments. And it can also expand partnerships with nonprofits to build something like a conservancy model. It doesn't have to just be conservancies. It can certainly be partnerships with other types of nonprofits. And on the right side, we have additional strategies that really require RAP identifying partners externally who can help lead. The first of these is the consideration of increasing the charter mandated allocation that we've been talking about, the property tax revenue that actually goes to RAP out of every person's property tax bill. There's a potential through a charter amendment to increase that. We could also evaluate the potential for a new property tax assessment, which would be a successor to Prop K. It could be something like a community facilities district, which is more geographically narrow. We could also evaluate sales taxes and city bond options. And what we've done is also looked at the ways that each of these strategies could be used. Some of them can be used for capital, for actually building and acquiring parkland. But many of them can only be used for either capital or operations and maintenance and not both. And so it's really important as we think about both categories, which ones can be used for which.
Thanks, Connie and Jessica. We're next going to transition to the action plan, which really translates a lot of these strategies into a clear roadmap for implementation. So the P&A is a roadmap, and we're really looking at how we can deliver more equitable, accessible, and high-quality parks and facilities across Los Angeles. So we first start by defining near-term actions. And so ensuring that the city can stay focused, adaptable, and accountable as it works towards meeting the evolving and long-term needs. The P&A is a big document, and it's looking out 25 years into the future. So by identifying these early actions, we're really hoping that this can kind of prioritize a few things that RAP can start to implement quickly and start improving the park system overall. So we are looking at kind of a few different ways that we can do this through early actions. And the one that's kind of right up at the top is focusing on the highest priority sites. And so we're also looking to address residents' top citywide priorities for amenities and programs. So this is across the 4 different regions. And these are coming from the statistically valid survey, as well as the comments and feedback we've collected throughout the different engagement sessions across the city. We also acknowledge that there are different priorities in different parts of the city. And so as things are starting to be implemented, being able to make sure that we're really kind of tailoring the needs for communities in different parts of the city. And then using the site planning guidelines to evaluate and improve the form and function. So thinking about how parks are designed and how they're working within the communities that they're in. So again, this is kind of the one that pops to the top, is focusing on the highest priority sites. And if we go to the next slide, I think it's important to kind of note that improving sites that need the most help, really it reduces pressure on other parks and benefits everyone. So while we are focusing specifically on, the first priority sites, that doesn't mean that other parks across the city aren't getting investment as well. And so these are the highest priority sites. These are listed alphabetically, but really, again, thinking about sites that are existing. So any of the parks that have a picture are sites that are existing within RAP's system right now. And then any of the parks that are sort of more in the pink squares are parks that we're saying should exist or should be kind of prioritized based on different needs and kind of different gaps within proximity or access to the park system. So thinking both about existing as well as future sites that the city needs. Some other early actions identified are looking at the level of service, so how many amenities are within the city, looking at the classifications to identify typical amenities. So if a park is missing a typical amenity for its classification, that's something that can be prioritized. Obviously, continuing to meaningfully engage with residents throughout the process is extremely important and has been something that the P&A has really looked to kind of advance within the ongoing engagement guidelines. And then finally focusing on securing sustainable funding for recreation and parks. And so we can't do this work without some funding. So then next, the P&A is a roadmap. And so we've identified the early actions and the strategies and priorities are really serving as a decision-making framework. So this is really for the community or elected and appointed officials as a reference point for how they can start to implement and work through a lot of these complex decisions. But this, on the next couple of slides, we're going to see a lot of really complex charts, but this is just us thinking through with RAP how they can start to really address some of these things and actually start to make decisions on what they should start doing first. And so we're looking at if RAP is presented with a potential project site, and then this is really looking at like the park level. And so just sort of thinking through a lot of the decisions and really making it kind of a simplified version for RAP as well as elected officials in the community to start to see how they can start to make decisions and advance the priorities laid out in the P&A. And so we actually play this out at one of the parks within the RAP system. And so thinking about all the different things that RAP officials should be engaging with as they think about the next steps.
Thanks, Max. As we sort of go into these next steps, I saw somebody ask in the chat if there were these slides were going to be available, and yes. So if you want to study the slides will be available. We are recording, so it'll take us a day or two to put the recording up. But the slides will be up either later this evening or first thing in the morning if you wanted to study some of the slides more. So a couple of quick notes on upcoming dates, and then we can take a few questions before we wrap up this webinar this evening. We're really excited that all of you decided to come out. I'm actually really excited how many people are here at the P&A budget deep dive. If you want to do another deep dive tomorrow night, we're doing a deep dive on classifications, level of service, and park guidelines. That is tomorrow at the same time, also on Zoom. And then next Thursday night, September 18th, we will have another virtual deep dive session on-site prioritization. Each of these are going to be recorded, and the slides will be online too if these times don't work from you. And obviously, if you hear someone else that's really interested in understanding the detail of the P&A, invite them to check these out. If you would like something a little less formal, but want to see some of our P&A team members out in some of our parks or at some of our events around the city, we'll be at Ciclavia coming up on the 14th. We're going to be at the Senior Center Fiesta Party at North Hollywood on the 26th of September. We're going to be at the LA Congress of Neighborhoods Exhibitor Fair on the 27th of September. We'll be at Felicia Mayhood Multipurpose on the 2nd of October coming up. You can check out any of these dates also on the website. It's a great moment to just plug the website. So as I mentioned, you can explore the website in 10 or 11 different languages. There's also alt text for people that might be visually impaired. We're going to be putting more links into the chat as we go through the Q&A and things come up where you can download slides or other information. And you can also go on and comment on the full draft of the P&A, which is available through October 15th if you have comments that you want to share with us. We are going to take some questions live here in real time. Isaiah is going to help us moderate. He'll read the questions as they've been posted, and we'll be happy to take a few that we might have come up here.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. Before we dive into the first question, there were some questions that came in via the chat, and we answered those directly. So, one asking about the 2009 Parks Needs Assessment Report. So we did include that link directly in there. Everyone should receive that one. And then as Jessica mentioned, some folks were asking if the recording will be available after. And yes, give us maybe a day or two to get that on the website. And we shared a link of where you can find all of those, including the virtual meeting recording from yesterday. Okay, so diving into the first question here. Since 2010, the charter mandated funds have increased 113%. Since 2010, net of kickbacks to the city have only increased by 12%. Why not reverse the full cost recovery program?
It's a great question. This person is very astute and understands the city. So just to maybe explain what this person is referencing, and then we can talk about a little bit. In 2008, the city started a reimbursement. It's called a general fund reimbursement, whereby Rec and Parks, as a semi-proprietary department, pays for staff pensions and benefits, as well as utilities for water and power. Prior to that time, those costs were covered by the city general fund. The methodology was to help clean up and understand which parts of the budget were affecting, what it was really costing to, say, run the parks program, or what it was really costing to run the libraries or other departments. So the intent was to make that clearer of where those costs were. What that caused, though, as utilities and staff pension benefits and pensions has risen, the amount of the budget that is needed to cover those costs has not risen as well. And in fact, as the point that Connie pointed out, the 2026 proposed budget actually has hardly any contribution from the general fund to Rec and Parks outside of what voters have mandated must go to Rec. So voters have historically in the charter mandated we will give this percentage of the city budget to Rec and Parks. Currently, council and our current government is not giving additional dollars to Rec and Parks, but Rec and Parks is being held accountable to pay the increasing costs of what we would call the full cost of labor, which includes staff benefits and pensions. So what this person is asking, why not reverse that full cost recovery? And I don't want to speak for council or others on reversing that program, and maybe Connie, you can opine on this as well. I think it's unlikely that it's going to reverse. I think that in terms of city accounting, the legibility of seeing what it really costs to run full programs and to run, a full staff or to pay for the utilities is likely to still be the continued method. However, more dollars need to be made available for as a percent of the city's budget toward parks to cover those costs, is what I would say. Connie, you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit of additional perspective. We've worked in cities and jurisdictions around the country, and there are not many of this size that are full cost recovery. Part of that is because there is a city kind of mission statement to serve people across the city, and to provide services at an affordable rate, either free or very low cost. So, for example, Rec and Parks summer camps are well loved and really important parts of the childcare kind of solution for many families, and they need to remain affordable. And so cost recovery for those services is not possible. And then when you scale out to the department as a whole, it is hard to sort of achieve cost recovery for all programs without making costs kind of astronomically high.
Thanks, Connie. Do we have any more questions, Isaiah?
Yes. Okay. Moving on to the next question. Mention has been made on limits of different funding approaches. That is, can it be used for capital improvements, deferred maintenance, operations, etc.? My questions involve what was described community facility bonds that were limited to a specific community. In terms of the usages, what are the limits for those community bonds? Also, how narrowly can the bonds be targeted in terms of property taxes within 2 miles of site or whatever?
That is all you, Connie.
No problem. Thanks, Meg, for the question. And I did gloss over this one pretty quickly. I just wanted to be mindful of time. So what I mentioned was community facilities districts, which are sometimes known as CFDs under the Mello-Roos Act, which feel free to Google, but just in short, they are a structure in which you can opt in to pay an assessment, sort of in addition to your normal property taxes, and have those assessments be pooled into a fund that the revenues of which can then go to pay for both capital and also operations and maintenance of a very prescribed set of infrastructure investments. Playa Vista was infrastructure, and parks and open space were largely built using CFDs. And they are geographically limited in that you have to define a boundary, and the boundary can be as small or as large as you want it to be, but there are feasibility restrictions. So, for example, if your boundary was the entire city limits of Los Angeles, the limitation is that you'd have to get something like 2/3 of voters, of property owner voters who live in that area to approve it. And don't quote me on that because it's a little bit complicated, the voting approvals, in addition to having city council agree to put this measure out there. Whereas in a smaller district, if you have just a handful of property owners, you could have a smaller number of to achieve approval. All that to say, it's a little bit technical, but community facilities districts and community resilience districts, which are also being talked about a lot in the post January 7th fires context, are one way that you could sort of geographically target additional funds to be infused. And yes, you can actually bond against the revenues. So knowing that you're going to receive a certain amount in additional tax assessments every year, you could bond against that in order to pay for an upfront cost.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, next question. We are told that the budget for the new Venice Beach Playground is $4 million. Can you please share that budget? It would be great to understand how Rec and Parks came to that number.
Good question. I don't have at my fingertips that level of detail on the Venice Beach Playground. Let us, maybe maybe we can go to the next question. We can see if there is a link that we have that would actually provide a little bit more breakdown on Venice Beach. I'm not sure. We'll do let's see if we have any little bit of search, and maybe we can come back to that one, Isaiah.
Yeah. Okay, next question. Will the current funding cover the parks that have been identified as first priority?
Great question. It depends on how you look at it. Short answer is, I would say in a cheerful way, yes. It depends on the timeline that you're looking at, of course. I know we all have needs that I have like a list of wants at my own individual park, and I'm sure all of you do too. So sometimes it can seem like, wow, projects aren't happening. But the amount of projects that Rec and Parks is doing, like deferred maintenance, repair work, operations, maintenance, construction around the city at any given time is actually staggering. So I do want to emphasize to everybody, like there is a lot of really great stuff happening. And I've had the privilege in the last 9 months to be at basically almost every park in the city, or someone from our team has. And during that time, just the amount of stuff that's happening is really remarkable. And so while it's, when you're one of 500, you can be like, my park, nothing's happening at my park, but there is so much happening. So short answer to this question, there is money in the system to get a lot of this work done in the next 25 years, depending on what time scale you're looking at, and certainly getting a lot of the top 25 tier 1 priorities done. I will say the biggest challenge to the tier 1 priorities is probably ones that are identified that should be new park land. So we have some neighborhoods in the city that are incredibly short on just total park acres and amenities. And in those neighborhoods, it's going to take some very creative thinking. So the parks needs assessment explores the idea of more community park schools. That's the idea that school properties be open, say on like a weekend or an evenings to residents, exploring what public lands might already exist that could be transitioned to parks, those sort of things. So while yes, there is money in the system to address priorities and needs, having the land available can be a limiting factor sometimes, especially when we see in the city land costs continue to rise, and there's a lot of pressure for like housing development and other things. The operations and maintenance side of things is there's not enough money in the system to do the level of operations and maintenance for all the priority elements that have been identified. So capital wise, I do think that there is money in the system over the years to do things or to pick up deferred maintenance, but we simply do not have enough staff to do all the priorities that have been identified on the staffing side.
Thanks for that. Okay, next question. Do these bonds go on forever, or are they time limited? Or are community facility districts funding time limited, or do they go on forever?
They are time limited. I can't remember the duration. It's around 25 or 30 years. Again, the details are in the Mello-Roos Act.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, next question. The charter mandated amount increases with the value of the assessed value that has gone up 5 to 6% a year. So
That's
more of
right.
a comment than a question, but
yeah, maybe we could speak to that, because if anybody was sort of confused, what hasn't changed in a century is the like percentage of the mandated amount that's going to Rec and Parks. But as assessed value of property in the city continues to rise year after year, RAP does get more money. So as Connie showed in those 2 slides, the 2025 amount that RAP got was 278 million, and the estimated 2026 charter mandated amount is, I believe, 298. Somebody can check my math on the slide, but maybe I'll actually just revisit that slide for everybody so that I don't cause any confusion. 1 second. So here we go. if you can see this, the 2025 278, because property taxes go up, the 2026 amount is estimated to be 298 million. The point here, what hasn't changed is the 3.25 cents per $100 in assessed property value. So property assessments are, they continue to rise as people buy and sell land. Land in LA continues to become more valuable, so the assessment does go up. Generally speaking, though, we've asked that amount of money to cover more things. So as was pointed out earlier tonight, this amount, this 3.25, didn't used to have to cover staff pensions and benefits or utilities. Now, in addition to covering everything that it was covering for the last 100 years, in the last 17 years, we've also asked the same percentage of the overall budget to cover additional things. So as property assessments increase and population increase, park needs also increase because we have more population. And we've put more pressure on this. So that person is absolutely correct. And hopefully that clarification helps for anybody that we might have confused earlier.
Great, thank you for that. Next question, how did the P&A come to a conclusion that rangers would be needed as an expansion?
Great question. There are a lot of ranger positions that are currently not filled, which was a really big concern of people that we've heard from this year. And the other element that we've heard from people is that there's a real concern about just enforcing what's allowed in parks, enforcement around what's not allowed in parks, I should say, and safety, feeling like there's someone there to, call or ask if you have a question or need help. So that's how that came from a lot of community feedback, that not only do we need to fill the ranger positions that are vacant right now, but potentially have more, and or the idea of ambassadors that would be able to help provide more public services. And definitely just from safety enforcement and ability to get people services that were not fully, a lot of times in parks, the only option is really to call law enforcement because there's just no rangers around. And there was a feeling from a lot of communities that if there were more rangers, we would reduce the amount of pressure on some other city services, and also just reduce the need for the level of intensity for some of the types of things that rangers could deal with in parks, like the level of intensity of bringing out law enforcement when a ranger could handle an issue.
Great, thank you. Next question, how are nonprofits, community partnerships that do valuable work at these parks being prioritized?
It's a great one, and I could start, and then maybe it would be good for others to chime in, Connie, Leslie, others. We've actually had a really successful working relationship with a lot of steering committee members that are nonprofits, as well as over 30 community organizations that have participated in our equity program, and then 12 community organizations that have been part of the community partner program for this. And it's actually been really great to hear how some of those relationships are working really successfully in other places that they can be enhanced. I think, Connie is very involved on the park advocacy side. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how some of those organizations are being prioritized or brought in. And then maybe we can kick it over to Leslie for some insights from the equity session, or Sarah as well, who's in the room here with me.
I'll start by saying I think the role of nonprofits and community organizations is in that sort of category of strategies that RAP should lead in terms of strengthening and bolstering those relationships. I think there's a lot of openness that we've heard from RAP to increasingly work with nonprofits. And I think, it's been one area of feedback that has been really helpful, is just to hear how that can happen. I also think that some of this is related to the types of roles that community orgs can play. So some of it is about providing programming, and others are about advocacy and fundraising, and all of that is really important. So I don't have I guess that's my best answer. I know, it's a priority for organizations that are doing this work to be involved, and it's really, I just have a maybe narrower focus on the funding aspect. So I'm thinking about how it can be a beneficial relationship where organizations can help support RAB financially as well.
Thanks, Connie. Leslie, do you want to weigh in a bit, and then we'll kick it over to Sarah too?
Sure. So we are deep in our third phase of equity sessions, which, as Jessica mentioned, is with 36 different organizations, many of them being nonprofits and community-based organizations. And the foundation of the equity sessions was really to meet people with maybe non-normative relationships with parks, and making sure that some of our lesser heard communities are prominent in the PNA. And then these equity sessions really shaped our guidelines chapters. So that's the park classifications chapters, ongoing engagement chapters, site planning specifically. And so all of those nonprofit voices are really represented there. And so I encourage you to look at those chapters, chapter 10 through 13, and we would love any feedback. Yeah, I'll pass it to Sarah to add anything, but I would say that those voices are very much highlighted in those 4 chapters.
Yeah, thanks. I think Leslie covered it really well. I'll just add that through these conversations, we heard ways that RAB can make the relationships less transparent, or make it clear how best to get involved at their local park, or impact things system-wide. So it's been a good conversation for these people to all come to the table and help identify barriers and embed that into the ongoing engagement part portion of the PNA that Leslie mentioned.
Great, thanks everyone. Really,
Oh, sorry, Jessica. I was just
go
going to
ahead,
add
no,
that we covered topics like spanning from accessibility to vending to homelessness in our parks, and have had and continue to have very thoughtful conversations with all of our participating organizations.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Okay, next question. Have you investigated signage?
So signage at a high level is something that has come up. It's system-wide in this sense. We have not inventoried every sign in the park system as part of this, but generally have identified some best practices for wayfinding and signage in the design guidelines piece. The other thing that I wanted to note is that the Venice Beach Playground report that went to the Board of Commissioners for Rec and Parks is now posted in the chat if you want to see how the Quimby dollars there have been allocated. It doesn't go into significant detail regarding the breakdown of the construction costs. I'm not sure if that's what the person was looking for, or if they were looking for the board report of where the funding was coming from, but you can check those out. I think the person was looking for the playground. There's also some work happening at the pier that was noted in the Q&A, and appreciate folks chiming in on that for sure. But yeah, definitely check out the playground report and that we put in the chat here for the person that is looking for that info.
Great, thanks for that. And a couple comments related to that too. So just noting the Venice Beach Oceanfront Walk is 3.75 million, I assume. And then the Venice Beach Pier maintenance and repair is 5 million.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay, we just have one question left, which is, can you show us where to find some of this info on the PNA website?
Yeah, absolutely. Would be happy to do that. I'm just gonna switch to a different screen here. There we go. So the website, as I said a few times earlier, is needs.parks.lacity.gov. So if you come to the website here, you can scroll down, you can see the overall content of the PDF is here. There's a short video you can watch. You can explore other upcoming meetings or recordings from prior meetings. At the bottom of every page, you can download a full PDF if you want to see the whole thing as a PDF. This is where you can also translate the site. So if you want to do this drop down, there are a bunch of different languages here that you can explore. If at any time you want to submit a comment on the P&A, there's a button that hovers over here in the lower right-hand corner that you can click and submit a comment. In terms of the budget stuff specifically, if you go into the About category from the drop down here, and you go to Rec and Parks today, you can explore a significant amount of, actually all of the things that we were talking about tonight. For example, go to the current budget and finance, hit learn more. This will take you to a sheet that walks you through a lot of what Connie was talking about tonight with the financial information, some of the graphics you saw tonight if you wanted to study them further. What Max was presenting around implementation is also under the About. Scroll down to implementation, and you can check out pieces of the cost and funding or pieces of the action plan here, and scroll down and read about these items. Like I said, you can also download the PDF and check it out that way. If you want to look at things that we were linking in the chat that are in the downloads, this is where you can find information about past community meetings, different languages for the boards and the slides, for example, neighborhood council reports, etc. There's also a fun little plug. There's a fun youth activity book if you have children or youth in your life. Or if you just want to sign up, if you want to get the emails knowing when project information is available, you can sign up for email updates down here. I saw somebody thanked us in the chat. Somebody said, thank you for posting the Venice Beach Playground budget. You're welcome. Thank you for asking the question. And I think that concludes our questions. And maybe I should just say thank you so much to everyone for joining us tonight. And we're glad you spent a little bit of your Wednesday evening learning about the Parks Needs Assessment. If you can't get enough, we'll see you tomorrow night at the same time at 6 o'clock to talk about guidelines and classifications.
Thanks everyone for diving deep.
All right, everybody, have a great night.